So, friends, we are back to the discussion, and the discussion is about Louis MacNeice as a poet and his particular poem, the Journal, Autumn Journal. And Professor Payal Nagpal in this part will focus upon the individual poem and will tell us regarding the themes that he brought in, by way of personal glance, but those themes were general in nature, and they would definitely interest the common reader of the time. And I use the word common because generally in the 1930s, the aesthetic trend would keep out the common, and Louis MacNeice himself was new to it, but then he had adapted himself to that particular idea in the poetic way, in his own terms, on his own terms, and in his own way. So over to Professor Payal Nagpal, and please give us the view of the poem from your angle.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So, T.S. Eliot actually asked Louis MacNeice to, tell him what this poem was going to be about initially. So, even before it was completed, he very accurately, sent a few notes. So, some of these are as follows: that it will be a long poem for, of from about 2,000 to 3,000 lines, written from August to December 1938. He says about it that it's not strictly a journal, but giving the tenor of my intellectual and emotional experiences during that period. So, which also tells us about the connection between journaling and poetry. He also says that, everything that is going to appear in the Autumn Journal is a first hand experience. And he says, I consider it to be significant. And he describes the sections, the dramatic quality, that, with about 80 lines in each, there is he says he expresses different parts of himself. For example, he calls himself the anarchist, the defeatist, the sensual man, the philosopher, the would-be good citizen. So he says there are many aspects. And what is extremely interesting, we talk a lot about the connection between speculative and detective fiction and reportage. So here he uses the term when he writes to T.S. Eliot, and he says it contains reportage, metaphysics, ethics, lyrical emotion, autobiography, nightmare. So, and of course, interrelation between abstract and concrete. He represents a few places and he mentions them accurately: Hampshire, Spain, Birmingham, Ireland, and he says especially London. In a sense, of course, he also talks about the form, but an important aspect that he says is, he says about the Autumn Journal, Louis MacNeice says this: I think it is my best work to date. It is both a panorama and a confession of faith. So, which is where, he says, going back to his initial comment that he made in the note, that it is the nature of this poem to be neither final nor balanced. And he says that there are, certain beliefs that he has, and, which I hope emerge in the course of this, and he's refused to abstract them from their context. And that's why he says that, somebody might call him a trimmer, somebody might call him a sentimental extremist, but he says, poetry, in my opinion, must be honest before everything else. So, he says, I refuse to be objective at the cost of honesty. And here are a few lines now from the Autumn Journal. So, let's see how this begins. It's, of course, a very long poem, so we'll just focus on the first section. So, he says, close and slow, summer is ending in Hampshire. Ebbing away down ramps of shaven lawn, where close-clipped dew insulates the lives of retired generals and admirals. So I think right at the beginning, Professor Prakash made a very important point about the First World War being in the backdrop. So I think retired generals and admirals is a very clear reference to that particular period. To continue, and the spyglasses hung in the hall and the prayer books ready in the pew, and August going out to the tin trumpets of nasturtiums. A little later, he says, and this is where we see the trivia of everyday life just coming in. and bacon and eggs in a silver dish for breakfast, and all the inherited assets of bodily ease, and all the inherited worries, rheumatism, and taxes, and whether Stella will marry and what to do with Dick. So, this is how the whole thing continues. We see, if we just look at the first couple of lines, so we get the environment, we get nature, how summer is ending and ebbing away, ramps of shaven lawn, where we have the lives of retired generals and admirals. There is a reference to spyglasses. It's very interesting how this would actually, a couple of years down the line, the spyglasses that are just probably hung, they will become more important. We will have the period after the Second World War. The bacon, eggs in a silver dish, telling us, what he had for breakfast. So this is a journal. So the trivia of everyday life also finds its way inside this poem. And of course, bodily ease and worry both. Who will get married to whom, rheumatism, taxes. Life is full of all these things, is what he's trying to say. So, which is where Teresa Bruce says about him in this poem that he is a train traveler, taxi rider and driver, tripper, jazz lover, newspaper reader, consumer of goods, party goer, lonely man, reader of books, smoker and drinker, student and teacher, lover and ex-lover, countryman and townie, husband and ex-husband, classicist and modern man, citizen, Irishman, Londoner. So I think Teresa Bruce has beautifully put together the different aspects of the poet that we are going to actually meet in the Autumn Journal, because he travels in the train, the whole reference to the taxi ride, he writes about jazz music. So I think this one particular quote has, in a sense, summed up the many cells of Louis MacNeice that we will see in one long poem. It's interesting that she talks about the husband and ex-husband, because this is the time period when he was also, at a personal level undergoing a divorce. So,
no, actually, I'd like to raise this question which you mentioned in the context of T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was himself, a self-acknowledged classicist, and he was the perhaps, a person who recommended these poems for publication. T.S. Eliot was associated with Faber and Faber, and he selected the poem. And I was wondering whether Eliot's own thematic concerns also are reflected in these individual things, because when you talk about the daily chores of people and going from the sensuous to the social and then back to the academic or ideological or what, this is what is also reflected in Wasteland in different parts.
Yes.
Wasteland is not as long a poem. There can be 3 or 4 Wastelands in the length of 2,000 lines. Wasteland is only 400 or so lines. But then the typist girl, the person on the street, those people who are roaming the market roads, all that is there in this. And perhaps Eliot would have been at that time a senior poet, would have been attracted to such details in poetry, and that's why he recommended it.
Yes, I completely agree with you. In fact, there are specific sections that I selected for this particular lecture which resonate beautifully with both the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock and the Wasteland, especially the first part of the Wasteland. So it's pretty much there. And yes, the concerns are there. But what I also saw in Louis MacNeice's writing was a kind of simplicity, which one does not encounter in T.S. Eliot, because T.S. Eliot is also bringing in a lot of myths and everything, and one can read, for instance, the love song at many levels, at the literal, at the level of the use of myth, the society, the complexity.
But once you also talked of Ezra Pound.
Yes.
Ezra Pound was responsible for certain myths, etc.
Yes. But in Louis MacNeice we see the very direct approach to the reader. It's like somewhere MacNeice wants the reader to understand exactly what he thought and what he was experiencing in those few months and just before the World War.
It's just 3 or 4 months, from
Yes.
August to December in
December.
1938.
Yes.
That's, I think, a very precious document for us.
Yes, it
that
is.
we can see what is happening in London and in England at that point of time, and that the whole thing has been captured through the description of these 3 or 4 months.
Yes, and much ignored, if I may say so.
Yes.
That, one really needs to actually read Louis MacNeice. So, to carry this further, here are some more lines in continuation. In the first section, and the growth of vulgarity, cars that pass the gate lodge, and crowds undressing on the beach, and the hiking cockney lovers with thoughts directed, neither to God nor nation, but each to each. But the home is still a sanctum under the pelmets, all quiet on the family front, farmyard noises across the fields at evening. So here I think he's giving us the two zones. There is home, there is the family, and then there are these farmyard noises. So the two very entirely different social groups reside here. So, within the home would be the middle class, emerging middle class, and so on. And the farmyard noises tell us about the workers who are working in the fields in the evening. And this is contrasted totally with what he says right at the beginning, growth of vulgarity, cars that pass the gate lodge. There are crowds undressing on the beach, and, they are, lovers, thoughts directed pretty much to nothing. And, the home is still a sanctum, but what kind of a sanctum is it? Is it really a sanctum? It could be quite ironic also. So he says that while the trucks of the Southern Railway dawdle shunt, so we see the trucks, we see the railways, we see the cars, and we see people on the beach, we see the family, which is still, standing somehow, as an entity there, and maybe symbolizing tradition in that sense. And poppy sidings of the night, poppy sidings, for the night, night which knows no passion. So the night is devoid of passion. And this is totally, it completely resonates with T.S. Eliot's kind of writing. So to carry this particular metaphor of the night further, he says, no assault of hands or tongue, for all is old as flint or chalk or pine needles. So sexuality here is described as completely dead and almost decrepit and devoid of any kind of life, because it is like old, like flint or chalk, which means it's wasting, or like pine needles. And the rebels and the young have taken the train to town or the two-seater unraveling, rails or road. And then he talks about how he is in the train, so which is where that quote by Teresa Bruce is very important about his many cells. So he's traveling in the train, and he says summer is going south, but he's going north, and he's bound for the dead leaves falling and the dying and the burning bonfire. So the dying that brings the harder life, revealing the trees' girders. So the frost that kills the germs of laissez-faire. And this is where I think I'm going to request Professor Prakash to please comment on this beautiful line, the frost that kills the germs of laissez-faire.
These are very ironical, and the way he is able to juxtapose, one with the other. Earlier you referred to, the war, the violence of the war,
Yes.
and God and religion. And the same thing, get mixed up here. What is religion to do with poetry at that time and with the war? But then all of us know that religion is an integral part of the complexity of social life, and that certain sanctions to violence are given by religion, of one religion or the other. So religion becomes that way kind of a traumatic experience, a traumatizing experience, where people just don't know how to react to the world. So all that is put together in a confessional statement in such a manner that it appears to be very simple and ordinary. But if you just pause and think, then you realize that the entire atmosphere of the time is being evoked through these images.
Yes.
The images are not personal; they are the images of the everyday kind that exists even today.
And what I find very interesting in this line is that, laissez-faire, he calls it a germ, and the frost is killing the germ. So then he, of course, describes various places.
Well, the economic terms coming so
Yes,
spontaneously there.
spontaneously.
Yes, yes.
And
that's true.
the frost is not killing something that is alive, but the frost is killing something that he's seeing as a menace. You know, it's a germ. So, and then he talks about London, and it's really insightful to see what he has to say about London. And he spoke about the realists, but a lot of the images about London really do remind us of early industrialization in London and how things have probably, post high industrialization, it's just become impossible to, breathe good air and survive.
Now, Professor Payal Nagpal, I'm wondering about one thing. Is this person very deeply agonized in his mind? You know, he is very satirical, he is very bitter, and he doesn't have that sense of humor, you know, which is buoyant and is that so?
Maybe it's the period also personal life, and he's also undergoing the divorce at this point of time. So that could be one. But he is very satirical. Even his later work, the reading room in the British Museum and so on. He's very critical in a sense, yes, and in that sense, it's devoid of. But optimism is there.
Okay.
There is. If we actually look, and I'm going to discuss, the
please,
last part.
Please take up
So,
that, yes.
very quickly, I'll just, close on the first section where he says that London is packed and stale and pregnant air. So, he talks about the women, which again reminds us pretty much of T.S. Eliot. And he says, my dog, a symbol of the abandoned order, lies on the carriage floor. And, a little later, when he talks about the women, he says, Surbiton and a woman gets in, painted with dyed hair, but a ladder in her stockings and eyes. So a ladder in her stocking and eyes, patient beneath the calculated lashes, inured for ever to surprise. And the train's rhythm becomes the ad nauseum repetition of every tired obeyed. And it continues like this, and then he moves on to a jazz song, a handbag of, with a pair of stockings, and then beautiful lines like, I loved her long, I loved her between the lines and against the clock, not until death, but till life did us part. I loved her with paper money and with whiskey on the breath. So this is very, very, Eliot-like. And to straight away move to, the last part, it's
and very emotional.
Very emotional.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
That's what you call, I think, by positive thinking.
Positive thinking.
Yes, yes.
So now an example, when we talk about positive thinking, he says, sleep serene. This is absolutely in the last part. Avoid the backward glance. Go forward, dreams, and do not halt. Behind you in the desert stands a token of doubt, a pillar of salt. So he says, go forward, go ahead with conviction, with belief in yourself. He says, sleep the past and wake the future. So he is forward looking in that sense, much as he's extremely critical and satirical, absolutely. But now the lines that he writes in 1938 are absolutely prophetic. He says, walk out promptly through the open door. I'm going to skip this. He says, the new year comes with bombs. It is too late to dose the dead with honorable intentions. If you have honor to spare, employ it on the living. The dead are dead as 1938. So I think he has completely probably predicted, the outcome of the Second World War. There is obviously something that he sees around himself.
And in 1938, when the war is not technically started.
Yes. And he says the dead are dead is 1938. So if you have any sense of honor, please use it for the living. And so he says, tonight we sleep on the banks of Rubicon, the die is cast. There will be time to audit. Again, this is very, Eliot-esque. There will be time to audit the accounts later. There will be sunlight later. And the equation will come out at last. This is
positive.
Where he ends it. This is how he ends it. So, actually, because it's a very long poem, so, yes, I think the comparison with The Wasteland was absolutely apt, and which is why, the poet Philip Larkin said of this particular poem, he says that his poetry was the poetry of our everyday life, of shop windows, traffic policemen, ice cream soda, land mowers, and an uneasy awareness of what the newsboys were shouting. He displayed a sophisticated sentimentality about falling leaves and lipstick cigarette stubs. So this, of course, would pertain more in a sense to the first part, not just of the first section, but the entire autumn journal. But towards the end, when he comes up with lines like that there will be sunlight later and the equation will come out at last, I think this particularly makes Louis MacNeice a poet that we must read in terms of what he has to really say right at the end, to look forward, to let the past sleep but awaken the future, even though he predicts that the year is bringing bombs with
He
it.
offers a historical point there because he is situated in the 1930s, and he is just before the war begins, and the concentrated poetic form there, I think, does justice to the complexity of the situation. The war is war clouds are hovering over the whole world,
Yes.
and then he is able to see a future which is different from the threatening present.
Yes.
So it's a very complex poem also in that sense, even though it appears to be very simple and
Yes, it is.
journalistic.
There are a lot of twists and turns in this particular poem, so it's a fairly long one. So
And it has epic kind of proportions
yes.
also, because it talks about Europe, it talks about the war, it talks about religion, it talks about the daily things, but those are the things that will finally squeeze blood out of people's actions and behavior.
Yes, yes. So this, of course, is in fact, I mean, he's written other poems also around this period, where like the British Museum Reading Room, This is a poem written around 1940, and here too he is critical. He says that under the hive-like dome, the stooping haunted readers, he calls them the stooping haunted readers, go up and down the alleys. Talks about these spaces as cells of knowledge, and he says honey and wax, the accumulation of years. So some on commission, some for the love of learning, some because they have nothing better to do. So here too, when he talks about knowledge and people spending their time there, he's also, I think somewhere the desire is to look at knowledge that is more organically linked with society, and to have that kind of expectation, in a sense, from the people around. So, where he says that the drumming of the demon in their ears, hope these walls of books will, kind of awaken them. So.
Professor Nagpal, what would you say about such a long poem in 4 or 5 sentences, if you can?
I think Autumn Journal is I wouldn't call it an epic poem, but I'll say it's a long and semi-autobiographical poem. It is a journal and an account of the poet's life, his observations at a very crucial moment in history, and the Autumn Journal documents for us the everyday life of the people at that time and gives us historical snippets about what people experienced while they were standing, really speaking, at the brink of the Second World War.
And if you look at the poem, the way you have read it, if you note that point of very ordinariness in the poem, so do you not think that he is allowing the working class sensibility into poetry, which many of the poets of the 30s may not, in that sense?
The very fact that Louis MacNeice, his writing underwent a change when he came to Birmingham, I think, that in itself is an indication that he was deeply influenced by the humanity that he saw in the working class. So I think I would agree there that yes. And that note of optimism in the Autumn Journal is something that needs to be kept in mind.
So friends, we have had a panoramic view of this long poem, Autumn Journal, by Louis MacNeice, and Professor Payal Nagpal has talked about the complexities and the simplicity and spontaneity in the poem, and all of them combine to make it a very compelling experience, that you actually imaginatively enter the world of 1930s in the Europe of the period, and that the poem is able to very honestly project the dilemmas and the problems that the ordinary humankind faced at that time. So I think it's a very educative kind of point that should consider the war aspect, the social unrest, social malaise aspect in the 1930s, and as she has rightly said, that it's a historical document today. It may have been journalistic at that time, but today as you look at it, then you can relate with it so very well, because the problems are of economics, the problems are of ideology, the problems are of the common masses and the ordinary life, and all these things are so well combined. So it's a good experience, Professor Payal Nagpal, to hear you on this very difficult poem, I say, even though you call it simple. And listeners, I'm sure that you would have enjoyed the poem, from this particular angle, that it's a very humanistic document.
Yes.
That Professor Payal Nagpal has defined it as in terms of interpretation. So thank you, and thanks, Professor Payal Nagpal.
Thank you, Professor Prakash.